Welcome, 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 welcome to the main stage at Ignite Space 2024. How are we doing today? Can we have a whoop? Ignite Space 2024! Oh, heavy night, guys. Should we try it again? Okay. I want these, yes! Because right round us now, we've got all the zones in action, we've got all of the networking, which is how it should be. But this is the main stage at Ignite Space 2024. We'll get there, we'll get there. Welcome back, if you joined us for day one yesterday. This is the second day here at the Royal Armouries in Leeds. And there will be a few sore heads because we had this extraordinary combination of a pub quiz mixed up with the live band, the Met, playing loads of space tracks, a travelling planetarium. This is meant to be a business conference, but it's more of a mini festival. I understand as well that Portia, who knitted the beautiful clanger, it was won by the Astro Agency last night, who I believe called themselves the Clangers. And I was made to make this very, very clear. This is not a toy for children. This is adult stuff, as is everything at this thing. We're going to get stuck right in with more energy. Loads of wonderful reviews on LinkedIn yesterday. And I think it's because we want a relaxed vibe, very informal. To help us with that, if you have questions for the keynotes, if you have questions for the panels, the place, download the app. Please, there are QR codes everywhere, and all you need to do is go to the specific sessions, and within each of these, this is where you need your magnifying glasses on, we've got all of the different areas. One of those is live Q&A, so if you have questions, please use the live Q&A on your apps, on your phones, and whoever's hosting that panel, or if it's me on the main stage, we'll read those questions and feed them in for you. As well as that, in the discussion forum section, it allows you to chat to other people who may be your peers or potential collaborators, and you can keep that conversation going afterwards, as well as my session notes, where, yes, weirdly enough, they're your session notes, and you can email them to yourselves afterwards to keep it going. Please review as well. There's a poll at the end of each session. Rate it, whether it's 1 to 5 stars, and then, you know, people get told off by the organisers if they haven't got 5. Right, if we haven't met before, I think there's only a handful, I'm Charlie Charlton. My trade is nothing in space. I'm a journalist, and I had 20 years at the BBC working in daily news. There's a lot of that this week, manifesto launches and all, and I decided to have a change, and it was because of narrative, if I'm quite honest. As you can tell by my accent and the Dire Straits soundtrack, I'm a Geordie, and there was a lot of talk within our region about what we used to represent instead of our new and future economy. And I feel like that can also be spread to other regions across the UK and the UK economy in general. So I wanted to be able to do that and tell the human stories of business to show what we are about. Inspire future generations, increase that, you know, growing skills opportunities and space. My goodness, that's the industry. There is so much opportunity here in that. What are you going to hear from today? You have, well, of course, you've got the Wonder Dome back in action, which is over there. Please register for your free tickets to get into those shows. They're about half an hour long and have about 12 seats, and you can be in the planetarium. Wonderful moment for you. But also on stage, it's your chance to hear directly from, there's a lot of interest in this, the primes. So we have Airbus, we have Lockheed Martin Space on this stage. You'll also be able to talk finance. There was, in the financial zone yesterday, the investment zone, there was a queue leading out from one of the sessions. So we'll be talking about how to access money today on this main stage from VCs, how to pitch, and we also hear from SMEs, crucially, about how to thrive in that sector and, you know, scale up, or if you're dealing with verticals. And in this event as well, it is pretty pacey, as you'll see on the agenda. So we have panels, we have keynotes across the 3 days. I think we've got 60 speakers, showcases, all your exhibitors, and I really can testify they have a lot to offer. I was talking a lot yesterday to a number of the guys over here, 40 exhibitors, and we've got the pop-up planetarium. So coffee to fuel you will be available throughout. And a few of the things with the zones, you'll see them in your schedule. So we've got 5 zones: investment, ecosystem, academia, sustainability, and business. In terms of AV, they operate very differently. So they're like silent discos. So you can put on your headphones, you sit there, and you're in your zone, the speaker will talk to you, and that's how you can hear things very, very clearly. On the main stage, of course, we're in the hubbub. So thank you to the UK Space Agency for creating this event. Thank you to the Satellite Applications Catapult, to Northumbria University, to Deloitte, to the Innovation Super Network for sponsoring these zones as well. How's about our first keynote? Are you ready? So we're going to hear from Josh Weston. He is CEO and co-founder of SpaceForge, a company that a number of people talked to me about yesterday. And if you haven't heard of them, where have you been? In-space manufacturing company, building the world's first returning and relaunchable satellite platforms. And I always like to find out from other people their opinions about somebody. So I'm going to give you some words that were said here. Pioneering, visionary, determined, a great storyteller, and then my favorite of all, quite a nice guy. So here he is, Josh Weston.
So to the very kind people that offered those words, I've got plenty of £50 notes in my wallet. Pleasure to meet you all. I'm Josh. I am indeed the CEO and co-founder of SpaceForge. I am somewhat of an imposter in this industry. My background is actually in politics. I didn't even know the UK had a space industry until Tim Peake was selected for his astronaut mission to the ISS. At the end of university, really totally unsure what to do with my life. I wrote to the CEO of a space company and begged for a job interview. Very graciously, they gave me one, and my first ever job was reviewing contracts for European space missions. And I got dangerous enough and everything else, and ended up in a position to be able to create to the co-founding of SpaceForge. 6 impossible things before breakfast. If you are familiar with Alice in Wonderland, it's what the Queen of Hearts says to Alice when she talks about how easy it is to do impossible things. I think that's very much what trying to create a space company is like, especially as one as difficult and as even as far-flung as you could say in the realms of science fiction as to what SpaceForge is trying to do. We are predominantly a hardware company. I'd say about 80% of what we do is hardware related. You can see here one of the first ever drop tests we did. For any of you familiar with the West Country, we made this out of parts that we bought from Trago Mills, where we took a weather balloon in the Mendips up to sort of 30, 35 kilometers altitude, popped the balloon, it landed in the Forest of Dean. It was quite pleasant. It then took us 2 weeks to convince the local council to send up a tree surgeon to go get it for us. Luckily, the data survived and everything else we needed, but that nice decal got eaten by the bugs and various critters of the Forest of Dean while we waited. If you come see our facility in Cardiff, you can see what's left of that satellite and some of the more interesting bacteria and mold that festered on it. But the reason we tested this is, as Charlie said, we're developing a returnable and relaunchable satellite platform. We're doing this because at its heart, SpaceForge is a materials company first and a space company second. So we look to leverage the benefits of the space environment to produce materials that are quite simply impossible to manufacture on Earth. So really, as much as we're interested in being able to help Earth, that's why we exist. The thing that we're really interested in as to how to achieve that is that lovely black, deep black of space. Earth is a wonderful place to live. We have gravity, which keeps us here. We have a dense ambient atmosphere, which allows us to breathe. And we have a, albeit rising, fairly consistent temperature across the planet, which allows us to exist. The trouble is that they are, unfortunately, things which we have to fight against for almost any advanced manufacturing process today. We need to bend. Perhaps we need to limit gravity's effect. Perhaps we need to limit the effect of the atmosphere. Perhaps we need to get to some extraordinary temperatures. The benefit of space is that it has all of those things freely available. We have microgravity, we have a high purity vacuum with effectively infinite pumping speed, and just depending on which way you're facing, you can access between plus 250 Celsius to minus 250 Celsius. You also have the benefit that of that vacuum grade that's available in space, contaminants are kilometers, if not hundreds of kilometers apart compared to even the best Earth-based vacuum we have today, where they might be a few nanometers apart. And that enables incredible flawless mixing. What we're therefore looking to do, so the reason that we ended up here as SpaceForge is that we were somewhat frustrated with the way that the space industry said that it tackled climate change. Space is a phenomenal arena. We often refer to it as the ultimate high ground. We take pictures back of our planet. We can point to deforestation in the Amazon. We can point to oil spills in the Gulf. You still need people on the ground to go and solve those problems. The two most underutilized aspects of space really to date has been its microgravity and its high purity vacuum. And we realized as two guys in a garage in Bristol that actually if you could harness those, then you could create solutions which directly contributed to being able to solve some of the most pressing issues of our generation. And really, every advancement that we've had as a civilization or as humanity has been around the next leap in advanced material science. So in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution, we of course depended on coal. In the 20th century, everything became about oil. And in the 21st century, pretty much as we're already seeing, everything is very quickly becoming about semiconductors. But that inflection point in semiconductors comes as we effectively reach the limit of what silicon is capable of. So I'm looking around the audience. Some of you are probably too young to remember this, but do you remember when we basically pushed the processor as far as it could go? So we invented dual core and then quad core, and now on AWS you can access like 354 cores. Well, that was because we pushed that processor as far as it could go. So to get round that barrier, we started to add more. And so as we sit at this inflection point where silicon is effectively reaching the end of its life as in terms of material science, there's still lots of things going on around design and optimization above it, but we're beginning to move to compound semiconductors. These are far more complex to produce and far more affected by Earth's environment when it comes to their production. And so as SpaceForge, we're looking to take the lead in effectively the in-space manufacturing of these advanced materials. The benefit being that by producing semiconductor crystals in space, you are able to create 3 to 5 orders of magnitude purity improvement across the crystal structure and eliminate more contaminants than is possible to do so on Earth. The result is that you get a semiconductor which is 10 to 100 times more thermally efficient than anything we can produce today. A 10 times improvement in thermal efficiency means you can reduce the energy a chip uses by more than 60%. It also means that despite the environmental burden of us having extracted the raw materials from Earth, having developed a satellite, having built that satellite, having shipped that satellite to America, and having launched it, having operated it, and returned it, for every kilogram of CO2 we create, we can prevent at least 15 tons being generated. Depending on our launch vehicle selection and our launch location, we can get that as high as 80 tons for every kilo we generate. And I have got the independent data, and I've even had that backed up by 4 different British universities in terms of the way we've calculated those CO2. Very happy to talk about how we've arrived at those numbers. And the result is utterly phenomenal. That energy reduction means that as an end user for these devices, you're able to trade off whether or not you want a phenomenal lifetime extension for those devices perhaps deployed into fields such as 5G or radar systems or advanced comms or even electric vehicles, or you can choose to run that device that much harder and get phenomenal improvement. For example, in case of radar, we're able to extend the range of a radar system by about 50%. Now, if you think around some of the horizon scanning capabilities that are possible, or even in-space radar systems, that offers a huge advantage. But importantly, as great as these numbers appear, they're also not actually new. The first time a semiconductor was made in space was actually done in 1974. Over 200 different compounds have been produced since that point. And we're really in a position as SpaceForge that simply because of the decreasing costs and the availability of talent and supplies, we just happen to be in the right place at the right time to make this a reality. Now, the architecture to produce these semiconductors sits in our returnable platform called the Forge Star. We had hoped to call this the Star Forge, but unfortunately that was trademarked by George Lucas. So when we were two guys in the garage, that was not a litigation we wanted to get involved with. The Forge Star is designed to be as compatible with a conventional satellite and conventional launch vehicles as possible. It's launched conventionally. Right now it's compatible with about 14 operational launch vehicles. Depending on the complexity of the crystal we manufacture, we're there for 2 weeks to 6 months on average. We then, at the end of that, deploy our return technology, which I'll show you momentarily. It's called Prydwen. It's named after the mythical shield of King Arthur, but it is best described as Mary Poppins from space. We then conclude our landing either at sea or on land. We're effectively geography agnostic as to where we come back, take the payload out, give the resulting wafers to our customers, refurbish the satellite, and do it all again. I believe it really will be that simple one day. So to show you just how Prydwen operates, so it is a deployable, low ballistic, coefficient radiative heat shield, by which I mean to say it's basically an upside-down umbrella, which allows us to start slowing down at a much higher point in the atmosphere compared to your traditional ablative vehicles. Most of those start to slow down at around 100 kilometers. We start to slow down at about 200 kilometers altitude. That means that by the point we hit the traditional re-entry interface of the Kármán line around 100 kilometers, we're traveling at a speed lower than 40 kilometers an hour. So an incredibly gentle descent compared to what we're used to, and astronauts traditionally experience as well. But I wanted to talk to you as much as I can talk to you endlessly about what SpaceForge is doing. I also wanted to share what it's been like to be a co-founder in this journey of creating a hardware company in space and in semiconductors, two of the most geopolitically contested environments we currently know, and to be doing that from the UK. So when we started SpaceForge, I was 26. I was in a position where I was currently working for an aerospace prime, and I was also partially involved in the space agency as well. But I was in a position where my team lead was 20 years older than me, and my manager was 23 years older than him. And I was literally waiting for this dude to retire so that the other guy got promoted, so that I got promoted. And I realized I could spend quite comfortably the next 40 years of my life in that organization and probably be just fine. But I also realized if the state retirement age existed by the time I got to that position, that I would look back and wonder what the bloody hell did I do with my life. And it was that sudden realization, coupled with a fortuitous visit to a pub on the outskirts of Bristol when my co-founder brought to me the technologies that sit behind SpaceForge, that I knew that I had to give it a go. But as I say, I did that at 26. I was very dumb. I had no idea what I'd let myself in for when it came to this. So I will say the actual act of starting a company, i.e. registering on Companies House, is too easy. It takes 10 minutes, it costs a tenner. It should not be that easy to set up a company. There should be a checkbox at the end of it, like, do you understand tax? Do you understand HR? Like, some checkbox to just give me a chance to just think about what I was doing before I was plunging myself into the deep end. I was not prepared for the world of hurt that was going to come after, not least because we filed the company basically too early into our journey. So for 2 years, we basically had to file accounts that just said zero, because we weren't doing anything other than tinkering around in a garage with a 3D printer and a vacuum pump with some money that I'd taken out of the house deposit I was saving with my fiancée at the time, now wife. But it was an interesting period, but it forces an intense amount of growth very rapidly. So I just wanted to show you a picture. This is that garage in Bradley Stoke. The first ever article written about SpaceForge was Bradley Stoke Millennials Clinch Investment, of which I'm very proud of, not least because only the Bristol Post would think to definitely, go straight for the jugular on the generational gap on its readers. But the reason you can only see my co-founder Andrew in this picture is because I'm holding the camera, while he pretends to muck about with GoPros and various things ready for that drop test I showed you at the start of this presentation. Raising investment, also an incredibly difficult thing to do. difficult regardless of what sector you're operating in, even more difficult trying to do it in hardware, even more difficult to do it in semiconductors and spacecraft. So a small piece of audience participation here. I'm hoping I can hear you. Does anybody want to take a guess at how many investors I had to speak with before I got my first yes? Higher. Anybody else? Didn't hear that one. No, not 500. Even at 500, I'm pretty sure I would have been told to give up. I spoke to 157 investors before I got my first yes. That's 150, pitch decks, business plans, financial models prepared again and again and again, each one iterating. I've still got all of those from that particular round, all 157 pitch decks I prepared from version 1. Now, in all fairness, version 1 said Josh 26 from Somerset, as like that was relevant to building confidence, and it had Andrew 31 from Kent. Entirely irrelevant. So don't get me wrong, the first investor was very right to say no. But every version, every update had a save. The business plan grew, the financial model improved, and everything else until we got that first yes. That first yes at the seed round then meant that we very rapidly had 7 yeses in a row. And in the end, I think we ended up with about 15 yeses or so. But we were only looking to raise about 1.5 to 2 million. We ended up raising 7.6, which at the time was the largest space tech round in Europe ever conducted at seed stage. And that's allowed us to grow to a phenomenal team based here in Cardiff, and also grow a team in the US as well. But I just wanted to show that was the office facility that we opened up back in October 21. I want to say that we did this. I might be wrong about the date. But this facility is now absolutely chocker, and very soon we'll actually be moving into our next facility upgrade after this as well. Impossible thing number 3. We were offered an opportunity to launch on the Virgin Orbit launch out of Cornwall. We were given, at that time, 5 months to be ready for the launch pad. So in 5 months, we designed a satellite, we developed it, we built it, and we qualified it, and we shipped it down to Cornwall. That was a huge, I believe it is the UK record from basically complete scratch to satellite design. We're unlikely to reach the world record, which is Sputnik 2 of 28 days. But a huge, huge move from the team to be able to pull that together. So you can see it getting integrated here. This was us down at Spaceport Cornwall. The unfortunate part was that we rapidly built that satellite, got it to the launch pad in 5 months, and then that launch from being at the launch pad was delayed by 7 months. Very difficult time I had informing some of our investors, some of whom are in this room, and I won't point them out. Every 2 weeks, sorry, you're going to need to rebook your hotel to Cornwall, or rebook your train or your flight, because they've pushed it again. And so for 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, that got pushed out by, well, in the end, by up to 7 months. And then, of course, that didn't go so great. We have one rule at SpaceForge. Weathering that storm was a very interesting part of the SpaceForge journey. Not least because of how much effort we put into making sure that it all worked. We were, in brackets, also the only company on board that launch vehicle that had actually taken out launch insurance, so that did help somewhat. But by 8:30 in the morning afterward, I, having gone from previous missions, worked on, well, launch never actually happened on the first day, so I'll book another night in Cornwall just to be safe. By 8:30 in the morning, we were the last company left in Cornwall. And one of our non-execs picked me up in the car and drove me to the spaceport, and he said, "You're going to do every interview they offer you today." And I did 42 interviews, a very magic number to this industry, over 6 hours. And I just had to basically, and they were just, all the questions were the same. What's it like losing a satellite? Well, believe it or not, but it's pretty shit. Oh, well, what are you going to do next? Build another one. How are the team feeling? How do you think? But there's actually something incredibly cathartic doing that 42 times over 6 hours, that I basically went through all the 7 stages of grief in a 6-hour period. And so by the end of the day, I was like, brilliant, I'm going to go for fish and chips, and make the most of having been down in Newquay. And at the same time, it was just really impressive to see from the team that we basically just took a day off, and we said, grieve, go home, just chill out. And the next day got right back on it with building all of our next payloads, our next missions, and even some Earth-based semiconductor production lines as well. So it's been really important to overcome that. I wrote this before the general election was called. This line famously was given by Harold Macmillan to a journalist when he was asked what gets in the way of good government. In the time that SpaceForge has existed, we've seen COVID pandemic. So I handed my notice in the same week that Boris Johnson took us into the first lockdown. I cannot tell you the bollocking I got over the phone from my mum when she found out I'd quit a very stable job during a global pandemic and at least UK recession. We then had pretty much the full force of Brexit come into impact at some point in the time frame. I can't remember what it was, but we were getting a delivery of flight hardware. And customs agents were suddenly not used to dealing with all of this stuff coming in from the EU. And it said, flight equipment, it was bagged up, do not open. Customs agent thought, nothing gets past me, and opened the flight hardware bag. So we have a domestic kitchen oven in our office where we had to rebake several parts of flight hardware because a customs agent didn't know what it was that they were handling. In the time that SpaceForge has been going, we've seen, well, right now, 4 prime ministers. I'm sure we're probably going to see a 5th very soon. I appreciate PERDA's in effect. And we've outlasted 9 science ministers. I'm not sure what the average tenure of a science minister has been over the time that SpaceForge has been going, but there is a very limited window where you can convince them that you're worth speaking with, that they're useful, and that they're able to get something out of the door. And the reason I do this is because really each of those moments, regardless of what event it's been, political or otherwise, has been an opportunity either for us to improve the story or an opportunity for something to happen. And as challenging as the period has been really over the past 5 or 6 years, it's also been filled with a phenomenal amount of opportunity. And the reason I can see that is because if we manage to get as far as we have done today, with all of these things having happened, I think about what a period of stability, regardless of politics or at home or whatever, might have meant for how much further ahead we can be. And I think it's really to SpaceForge's credit, not mine, but my team's, in that we've been able to do so much with so little, with so much going on. And of course, impossible thing number 6, establishing a great work-life balance. Just kidding. I take very few leaves out of Elon's book, to be honest. But one thing that he said, probably quite some time ago now, that actually stuck with me, is that Rome wasn't built in 40 hours a week. I think he had a point. Doing a startup is a marathon and a sprint at the same time. You're always sprinting to the next milestone, the next objective, the next piece of finance, whatever it might be, but you have to have an incredible long-term vision and roadmap ahead of you to either be able to justify the pace at which you're moving to today or to demonstrate the size of the business that you will become in the future. And I will say, you know, myself and my co-founder are incredibly grateful to our families and how much they've been able to support us in everything that we've been able to do. We've also seen that across the wider team. So really, a joke I occasionally make is everybody's part of SpaceForge, they just don't realize it yet. And that's because it's just so much more than the company itself to actually make this work. It's the stakeholders in this room, it's audience members, it's investors, it's people at home, people that are willing to, you know, even give you a lift when you're stuck in Farnborough late at night. It's an incredible team sport, and I think this industry really demonstrates how much of a team sport it is, because it was even touched on actually at the breakfast this morning. Sometimes people are your competitors, sometimes they're your collaborators. This has to be an incredibly collaborative industry, not least because compared to other industries it's quite small, but also because it's incredibly global. You know, there are companies in this room which have got headquarters all around the world, and they all work together, regardless of what might be going on elsewhere, to be able to work together. And I think that's just an incredibly important thing that we see, and we don't see it everywhere. Why do any of this? Why put myself through that repetitive hell of trying to grow a deep tech space company in the UK? Like, why does this actually matter for this? It is so important to me that I have the opportunity to work on something which is, well, for a start, bigger than myself, but bigger than the sum of its parts. when this happened, when we make those semiconductors in space and when we return them, there is a before moment and there is an after. And there are so few opportunities to work on a technology where you can genuinely say there was a before moment and an after moment. You know, they're literally littered throughout our history. Is a phenomenal opportunity. And I also realized that having this opportunity meant that even if it didn't work out, I was better for having tried. And I think that's really, and again, as a sector, the amount of failures that we experience are much higher than other failures, but we go again, we try again, we improve, we invent new things, and we go again, we fly again, we launch again, whatever it might be. And so there is an opportunity where we have, as Space Forge today, to go outside of that very thin blue atmosphere that you can just about see on this image and do something out there that helps save us here. Now, there is a Welsh word, hiraeth. I probably horribly butchered that pronunciation as a boy from Somerset. But roughly it translates to homesickness or longing. But it also roughly translates to homesickness or longing for something that you never really had. If we don't start to engage with our entire ecosystem and our entire planet to that level of magnitude, we will lose it. We are the generations that have the opportunity to fundamentally shift that story from being one of longing to one of acceptance and peace, and actually really redressing the balance between the finite natural resources we have on this planet and our ability to progress as a civilization. And all of that is made possible with this incredible team of 58 people, I think we are today. We represent 23 or so different countries, a lot of European nations, but we've also recruited from Japan, Australia, Brazil, Venezuela, America, India, Turkey, and a few other places to make this happen. And if I can convince somebody to give up the coastline of Brazil for the coastline of Cardiff, then I'm pretty sure that we must be working on something incredibly compelling. And all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
Okay, I have some questions coming in. If you've got any to add, please just send them on the app now. Come with me here, because I think there's a few things I'd like to pick up on. One is how you've continually adjusted your story. So this two guys in a garage thing works quite well because it gives you the roots. It's that kind of authenticity of passion and all the rest of it. However, depending on the audience you're talking to, it's either relevant or it's not. After 157 pitches, how did you flip that to be, there is that wonderful story that gets you in the heart, but here's the data, here are the stats, here's the proof.
So really what matters is the things that we were doing in that garage at the time. So I think I kind of touched on it, that we had a 3D printer and a vacuum pump that was cobbled together from some of our housing deposits. We then went through several prototypes trying to 3D print a vacuum chamber. We think we actually became the first people in the world to 3D print a vacuum chamber. We then learned there are very good reasons why people don't 3D print them. They're made out of plastic and they melt when you start to put high temperatures through them. So 13 prototypes later, we managed to maintain a heat in it for long enough. We got some data, and then we stopped doing 3D printing. We moved to a semiconductor process which ended up developing an RF mesh, which was measured by wrapping it round the circumference of a wine bottle, because it was the only thing we had to hand in lockdown. And we struck our first plasma while going through those 157 pitches. So some of those people that originally said no, we went back to later on, and they said yes because of what we've been able to achieve in that garage.
And is it that determination that people are drawn to for you to get that investment? Is it that problem-solving skill that...
You'd probably have to ask our investors that question.
They must have said that to you, though.
I wouldn't say it was a determination. I would say it was like sheer bloody mindedness or persistence. And I think that's really, it's less your ability to time what you're doing, and it's more about the time that you're willing to spend on attempting that thing. And so, the fact that we were willing to go for so long and hear so many no's and still come out on the other side, I think is really what mattered.
I do an awful lot of interviews with people in the biosciences, and the number of pitches in that field is similar.
Yeah.
I mean, brutal. How do you as a person, I mean, you're adapting your scripts, you're changing your pitches and so on, but how do you really go back to square one and think, right, fresh face, let's try and get this name?
I have a very long list that's like Arya Stark's, but instead of like, I'm going to go learn how to become an assassin, I just think these are people that get added to the list of people I'm going to prove wrong. Highlights probably include my old art teacher. Kwasi Kwarteng makes the list as well.
Wow.
But I don't take the no's personally anymore. I think that's incredibly important. Like, there are a whole bunch of reasons why that investor might not be the right fit for your company or might not be the right fit for you at the time that you approach them. But I also do save the best no's I've ever had, because one of them happened during the pitch. I was about 2 slides in, he went, I'm going to stop you here. This is way too hard for what we invest in. It's a no. And I was like, you know what, I just really appreciate that, because I then at least got some of my time back. Equally, I had a no where an investor said, well, you know, your company is very high risk, but it promises a very high return. For that reason, we're out. And I was like, you've just summed up neatly a dictionary definition of venture capital, and then said that's why you're not engaging. But I saved it, because you know, the no's, I think you can often learn a lot more from compared to some of the yeses.
Okay, I'm going to run through some quite technical stuff here, okay? You can give me quick answers if you can. This came from Fizzazaldi. There is a significant emphasis on sustainability. What propulsion systems does SpaceForge primarily use?
Green chemical propellant. We have to have a density enough of delta V and thrust duration to actually get the energy to come home. But we exhaust it all in space before coming back to Earth.
Georgia, can you tell us more about the manufacturing process in space? How long does it take, and what's actually happening up there?
It is best described as a space-grade children's chemistry set. Depending on the complexity of whatever semiconductor we're manufacturing, the manufacturing process is anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. To describe that chemical process it's a bit like when you put metal in a microwave accidentally, but on this time you're doing it on purpose.
Great. This came from Djibouti, and he says, from your experience, what is the typical reaction of investors towards companies serving as strategic partners for the development of commercial space systems, considering they tend to be skeptical? Typical reaction of investors.
I've just done it right there. Is you want to do what, and you think that's only going to take how much, and you're going to do that in how long. So I think really the thing that we managed to do as SpaceForge is just demonstrate how many people have done this before us in a research capacity. And really SpaceForge has just stood on the shoulders of giants. Like, I can point to over 200 different experiments over the past 20 years that have done some form of semiconductor compound and show the data that came from them. And we're basically taking that and saying, right, well, now there's an opportunity and there's enough interest in compounds to commercialize it. So it's really having that yin and yang of technical depth, but also business acumen to be able to get it over the line.
We're having a finance panel later on with VCs and all the rest of it. I'm sure you'll be here. I was just wondering, because you said that you were only pitching for 1 to 2 million on that first seed round, but you got 7.6.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to take the extra? Because a lot of companies don't.
Yeah, they don't. More money is never really a bad thing in this industry, because, as we've also demonstrated with parts of our story, things go wrong.
Yeah.
And if we hadn't had the kind of really the capital buffer to weather some of those storms, then SpaceForge would have died a long time ago. But I think it was also because, to be honest, the first yes I got was from an American investor, and they were like, we love what you're doing, but you're not raising enough money. So they gave me a yes, and then they called me half an hour later to say, we want you to raise treble, and we're going to help you find that money. And then they did help me find that money. I had a call with a guy who I think was employed, he was like the first 10 employees at Uber, and he ate a sandwich, like a foot-long Subway, while I gave him my pitch, and I was like, who is this? Like, he's totally uninterested. He demolished that sandwich in like 5 minutes. I was super impressed. And then at the end of the call, he just went, yeah, put me in for 300K. I couldn't believe it.
Brendan says, how did you initially contact the 150 investors?
Huge amounts of cold outreach, emailing inboxes, going in via warm connections from people I knew, finding them at events, conferences. I went to a conference in Washington, D.C., and I got invited to a party in Virginia, and it was like I got taken on a party bus, but it turned out that they were all investors. I went with 19 of them, and then all 19 of them put in like 5K.
That sounds like the greatest party bus ever.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And I mean, the living room that the party was held in, you could fit my whole house in. Like, it was a phenomenal opportunity. So really, to summarize that, I'd just say yes to as many things as you can and go along, because it's really quite impressive what can come out of that.
And just finally, because you mentioned Tim Peake at the start.
Yeah.
And I was saying yesterday, I've been having one of those moments where, you know, you're coming to cover space stuff, and then you just feel like it's kind of breeding all around you. It keeps turning up. Moonraker was on the telly, dreadful. But Tim Peake,
wow.
the worst James Bond film. Anyway, but Tim Peake appeared in one of the Sunday papers this weekend.
Yeah.
And there was this wonderful quote, and I just want your thoughts on this. So he says, fitting in with you, the diminishing cost of transporting space cargo creates massive potential for shipping clean, limitless solar energy back down to Earth. I don't even think the space industry itself has fully woken up to what that means for what you can do in space. If you get so much material into orbit so cheaply, you can build factories up there, we can print human organs using bioink. We are maybe 10 years off. It's game-changing in terms of economics. The only limit is our imagination.
I mean, I'd agree. I mean, I've met Tim a few times, so yeah. I mean, I think certainly he's not wrong. I think the thing which Tim touches on there is very few of our customers are actually other space companies. And as a sector, we tend to look quite inwardly, or we tend to look around at each other. But I mean, you know, speaking of Spaceforge, I don't actually have a space company as a customer. My customers are in radar systems, they're in telco applications, they're in electric vehicle companies. And it's very, well, I mean, maybe you will 3D print a heart for an astronaut that needs a transplant while they're up there. But actually, those customers are all here, and they exist in the health or the medical sector or wherever. And I think we could be doing a lot more to engage with other sectors on how they will or already do utilize what we do in space.
And you feel that's the future, that collaboration you were talking about, multi-sectoral?
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like we could go on and on. But you'll be here?
Yeah, I'm
today,
sticking around for a bit
happy
longer.
to talk. Please, thank you. Josh Weston, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Because he was as good as everybody said, we're running a little bit later. So just to let you know that we're going to be back here probably about 10 past 11. We'll get underway with our panel with the primes. So feel free to take a comfort break, grab a cuppa, or you can stay seated. The zone sessions are also underway right now as well. You've got your pop-up planetarium to get tickets for, but the primes back here very shortly. Take care.